Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I have to give all praise, infinite glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Shai, Ba'ashem Kodesh. Yahweh being the true name, only calls God, Ba'ashem in the name of, and Yahweh Shai, your Lord and Savior, only called Jesus, and the Kodesh, mean Holy Spirit. Double honors to apostles and others, a great millstone that rule well and the worthy double honors. And peace and blessings you all reflect out there, push the work of the Lord in true faith and sincerity, and more your bodies over sacrifice. Shalom, Paul as well. This is your brother Mashah, and today's edification and exhortation, this lesson, we'll be basically going over, entitling this lesson, that it takes a real man to admit that he's wrong. It takes a real man to admit that he's wrong, So that basically means, man, that, basically holding yourself, learning how to hold yourself accountable, man. You know what I'm saying? Because, we often, in our mind, especially due to, the super ego, part of our brain, we tend to believe that, we always do the right thing and ultimately that, we're untouchable, man. But that's not always the case, man. Sometimes we do go off and we will go off. You know what I'm saying? We're in the flesh. We're not perfect, man. You know what I'm saying? So we got to learn how to take accountability, man. You know what I'm saying? Especially, if we want to be deemed as honorable men, the future, rulers of this world, stuff like that, we got to learn how to take accountability, man, because this what separates, a leader from a follower, man, is taking accountability, man, actually accepting the truth, man, because it's easy to hide from the truth. It's easy to put the blame on, on others, but it takes a real man, in order to admit that he's wrong, and through failure, that's the way, you're able to learn, man. Experience is the best teacher, man. So if you go off, it's all right, man. It's all right. But when you look at going off as like a big, huge thing, you trying to be perfect, that's when you're going to completely fall off, man. The scripture says, man, be not over righteous, lest thou destroy thyself, man. So if you trying to be so perfect, which is, not possible, man. We strive to be perfect, but we can't literally be perfect, man. Being in this flesh, stuff like that, we're not going to be able to be perfect all the time, man. So that's where, accountability comes into play, knowing, oh, all right, I messed up, now it's time to move on, and, and better myself, man, because, through the mistakes, man, we're able to learn, man. We're able to try to better ourselves, man. We're able to, try new things, that's gonna make us able to, operate, at that, high efficient level, man. The scriptures say, man, the righteous man falleth, 7 times, man, roughly paraphrasing, and get it back up, man. So at the end of the day, man, we gonna fall, man. We gonna make mistakes. You might offend a brother or whatever, without you even realizing it. But still, this is why it's important, to incorporate reflection into this walk. Because like I say, sometimes we, even though it doesn't seem like, we going off, or it didn't seem like you meant to offend someone or a brother or whatever, man. Reflecting, that's actually a stoic practice. And even in the scriptures, man, the scriptures always tell us, man, to reflect. But what I've incorporated into my life is that after, I complete my day or whatever, before I go to bed, I just look up into the, ceiling, and I just reflect on the whole day, thinking about what I, said, I replay everything, man, and be like, damn, I should have done this, stuff like that, man, and by reflection, you actually, catch the mistakes you do out throughout the day, because, life goes so fast, man. There's so much distractions that we tend to, forget the things that we do. The little things and the little things. Yeah, we might remember the big things, But it's the little things, man, that really be the most significant things, man. As they can transform into big things. You know. So just incorporating reflection. What I'm saying, into your life. Reflecting. Thinking before you do things, man. What I'm saying, and just really just once you accept that you're not perfect. What I'm saying, that's ultimately when you become perfect, man. What I'm saying, because now that you know that you can't ultimately be perfect, now you're gonna slowly become perfect, man, and strive for that perfection, because now you know what to do and and what not to do, man. you know but let's get into the scriptures, man. you know um let's go to the book of James chapter 5, in verse 16, man. This is the book of James chapter 5 and verse 16, and it reads, "Confess your faults one to another and pray for one another that ye may be healed. And the effectual fervent prayer of the righteous shall availeth much," man. Of a righteous man availeth much, man. What I'm saying? So, by, confessing your faults, man, actually admitting, that you went off, what I'm saying, or that you offended a brother, you did something, any type of thing, what I'm saying, that's considered going off, what I'm saying, that's what ultimately, what I'm saying, sets you free, man, because the scriptures even say, man, the truth will set you free, what I'm saying. So we gotta, confess, our faults to one another, man, and keep it real with brothers, man. What I'm saying, and that's a big thing. What I'm saying, in this truth, you got to be able to, hold yourself accountable, man. What I'm saying. I had, there was some little spiritual tension between brothers, me and some brothers, through YouTube, where ultimately this brother had basically, called out, this camp basically for not, warning, the rest of the sheep that, a brother went off and that he's no longer at the camp, and basically fell out the truth. So the brother was like that, and then other brothers from that camp was basically trying to say, oh, the brother was seeking vainglory, or the brother was hasty, to make the video, and basically saying the brother made, like, what if, the brothers had, rebuked that brother behind closed doors and stuff like that, basically defending the brother, what I'm saying, but that's in the past or whatever, we squashed that. But basically what I learned from that situation was that, sometimes, brothers don't want to necessarily, embarrass a brother, what I'm saying, because, brothers might be close, brothers might, go to the club here and there with each other, man, we out on the highways and byways together, we do sit downs, it's like you become actual family, man. So in a way, you don't want to embarrass your brother, but, if a man holds, ultimately themselves accountable, before others, hold them accountable, what I'm saying, there will be no need of trying to, not trying not to embarrass a brother, because a real brother, man, is gonna, respect you more if you quote unquote embarrass him, man. What I'm saying? Because, through that rebuke, it kind of feels like embarrassment, but through that embarrassment, you ultimately, improve yourself, man. What I'm saying? Like, Tahar, I had made a video, a classic video, Elder Tahar, basically saying learn how to be an asshole. And sometimes, being an asshole, holding people accountable is the best thing, to do. You see a lot of greats, like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, a lot of these, top people, Steve Jobs, a lot of these people were assholes, man, because, but by them being assholes, they ultimately led to great things happening, and people becoming greater than what they were, because of accountability. But at the end of the day, what I'm saying, they wouldn't be able to have the power to hold people accountable, without them holding themselves accountable, man. What I'm saying? So accountability is a big thing, man. What I'm saying? You don't, you're not going to be embarrassed, man, or you got to embrace the embarrassment, what I'm saying? Because that's the only way you improve, man, It's like a girl, man, might embarrass you. You know what I'm saying? You might ask a girl out and then she embarrasses you, right? You know, because you probably had, you know, not the best haircut or whatever. You know, anything embarrassing, man. So after that, you know, through that chastisement, you ultimately like, oh, you know what? I gotta level myself up, you know, so I don't ever have to go through that thing anymore. You know what I'm saying? You know, and then now you leveled yourself up. Now the girl can't embarrass you no more because you maxed out. You know, through that embarrassment, you're able to be maxed out, man. So sometimes, you know, embarrassment is not always a bad thing, man. It's a part of life. You know what I'm saying? But that's what comes with, you know, being accountable, and that's ultimately what brings peace to one's life, man. You know, learning how to accept things, man. Even if you're wrong, even if it feels embarrassing, you know what I'm saying? Even if you feel naked, you know, metaphorically speaking, that's what's gonna set you free, man. You know what I'm saying? Is by embracing, you know, the good and the bad. You know what I'm saying? You know, and now let's go to the book of Galatians chapter 6, um, the chapter 6, starting at the first verse. This is the book of Galatians chapter 6 and 1, and it reads, Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such as one in the spirit of meekness, consider thyself, lest thou be tempted, man. And that's right. You know, like when you know, if a man, you know, another man is overtaken in a fault, you know, goes off, you have to ultimately be spiritual, man. You know what I'm saying? Ultimately restore that brother's spirit, you know, in meekness. You know, when we rebuke a brother, we do it in all humility, man. You know, we're not gonna be out here, you know, trying to, you know, belittle a brother, you know, stuff like that. There's a difference between rebuke, you know what I'm saying, actually trying to help someone, and there's a difference between trying to, you know, belittle someone, man. You know what I'm saying? You know, and you know, so when you restore a brother, you know what I'm saying, you ultimately gotta consider thyself too, lest thou also be tempted, man. And that's right, man. You know, before you know, obviously it's a beautiful thing, you know, to you know, try to help a brother, correct a brother, you know what I'm saying, stuff like that. But before you correct a brother, you know what I'm saying, before you try to restore a brother, you got to consider yourself too, man. You got to hold yourself accountable, you know, before ultimately you get tempted by the same thing, man. You know what I'm saying? In verse 2, bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Yahushua Mashiach. In verse 3, for if a man think himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceiveth himself, man. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, that's another example of holding yourself accountable. By holding yourself accountable, you ultimately stay in a humble state, man, and you don't look at yourself as a god, man. You know, you don't have that spirit of narcissism. You don't think that, oh, you're perfect and you can do no wrong. You know what I'm saying? You ultimately come in a state of meekness and you know, humility, man. You know, so, you know, when you think you're something, man, you know, and you're not, man, you're just deceiving yourself, man. You know, because you're not holding yourself accountable, man. You know, and you're always gonna remain at the same level because you're not holding yourself accountable. You know, like I said before, man, you know, before you can hold anybody accountable, you gotta hold yourself accountable. You gotta look yourself in the mirror and be like, oh, I need to work on this. Oh, I'm not that good. You know what I'm saying? It's okay, man, to tell yourself, man, you know, you're not at the level, you know what I'm saying, where you're at. It's better to keep it real than to live in delusion thinking you all this good and then you don't got works to back that up. The crazy thing that I said that because the next verse is basically going to say what I said in verse 4. But let every man prove his own work. You know what I'm saying? So every man got to prove his own work, man. You got to hold yourself accountable, man. You got to make sure you're putting in the work, you know, on yourself. And continuing on, and then shall he have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another man. That's right, you know. So, you know, when you hold yourself accountable, when you put in that work, man, you know what I'm saying, you ultimately are gonna rejoice in yourself alone, man. You're not gonna need the validation of others, you know, because you already know that by you holding yourself accountable, you're ultimately gonna be first and foremost happy in yourself, man, because you know that's that intrinsic motivation. Now you're validating yourself, and that's the most important thing, you know, because externally you can look like you're the most perfect thing, but your inside, man, you know what I'm saying, that intrinsicness, is gonna reveal, manifest, man. You know what I'm saying, to the outside, eventually, and you will be exposed. You know what I'm saying? In verse 5, for every man shall bear his own burden, man, and that's right. You gotta bear your own burden, man. You know what I'm saying? Be accountable of your own walk. And actually, let's go into the definition of accountability too. Um, accountability is, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, accountability is defined as the quality and state of being accountable, particularly involving an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's action. It encompasses the recognition of one's role in the situation and the acceptance of the consequences that arise from these actions, man. And that's right, man. You know what I'm saying? That's what accountability is, man. Being able to, look at your part in a situation, man, first and foremost, before blaming it on someone else. One thing I learned in life too is that a lot of things that happen to us, we're in charge of that, man. We're the ones that ultimately, made that happen, man, whether you realize it or not. People treating you, like shit. You know what I'm saying? People looking you as lowly, man. You know what I'm saying? If you're like I used to do that in the world. When I was in the world, I used to have low self-esteem, and I wasn't realizing it, but I was projecting basically myself as a punching bag. You know what I'm saying? So I was confused to why people are treating me this way, even random people. But it's like, damn, I'm projecting myself. I'm making myself like a fool. I'm being a clown. Of course, people is gonna, look at me as entertainment and use me as a punching bag, man. You know what I'm saying? So, for instance, your girl, you know what I'm saying, you know, a lot of people in the world, they might not be getting girls. You know what I'm saying? You can't be blaming it on women. You know what I'm saying? So, oh, women don't like men anymore. No, you gotta hold yourself accountable and be like, damn, I need to work on my looks. I need to work on, getting the bag, whatever the niggas say in the world, you know what I'm saying? But you ultimately gotta, look yourself in the mirror and hold yourself accountable for not getting what you want, man. Or not being at the level, you want to be, man. You can't blame it on the world. It's easy to blame it on the world. That's what 99% of people do, is blame it on the world. But the most successful people is those who take accountability, man. And always remember the things that happen to you, man, is, because of you, because at the end of the day, you're the master of your own destiny, man. You know what I'm saying? If you believe that, if you believe negative things are going to happen to you, then they're going to happen. If you believe good things are going to happen to you, then they're going to happen, man. It all starts with the way you think about yourself, man. It's all mental, man. You know what I'm saying? And now, let's go to the book of, well, let's read another thing, man, basically going on, because it's easy to tell the next person what to do, you know what I'm saying, but, if you're not doing what you're supposed to do, man, you just being a hypocrite, man. And now let's go to the book of Matthew, chapter 7 and verse 3. The book of Matthew, chapter 7 and verse 3, and it reads, and why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thy own eye? In verse 4, how wilt thou say to thy brother, let me pull the mote out of thine eye, and behold, the beam is in thine own eye? Verse 5, thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then thou shalt see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye, man. That's right. You know what I'm saying? A lot of times we're eager to tell the next person, give the next person advice. Oh, you got to do this, bro. Nah, bro, you can't be doing that. And then the whole time, you not doing what you're supposed to do, man. You know what I'm saying? How you going to listen to somebody, who's ultimately not leading by example? And that's a lot of times, especially the youth typically doesn't listen, to the elder generation, because, sometimes the people is not leading by example. You know what I'm saying? And they come forth as hypocrites, man. You know what I'm saying? You know? For example, like the elders, man, Great Millstone, what I'm saying, the Boston elders, they've been in this thing for a while, man. A long time, 40 plus years. They've been leading by example. You know what I'm saying? They've been doing their thing. They've been consistent. You know what I'm saying? They've been even holding themselves accountable, man. You know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, we're gonna follow them because they're ultimately doing what they're supposed to do, man. You know what I'm saying? When they're edifying us, telling us to do all these things, they're also incorporating these things in their life too. You know what I'm saying? Because always remember that, you know, a great teacher, was once a great student, man. In order to be a great teacher, you must be a great student, man. And that's where it comes in that humility, and that accountability. Being able, to take criticism, what I'm saying, and better yourself from it, man. You know what I'm saying? Being able to trust the spirit when the spirit tells you, what I'm saying, nah, you can't be doing this anymore. It's time to level up. You know what I'm saying? That's accountability, man. Being able to trust yourself, being like, you know what? I gotta, embrace, what I'm saying, that this mistake I made, because that's the only way I'm gonna learn, man. You know what I'm saying? So we gotta lead by example. You know what I'm saying? You can't be out here, telling people what to do and then you not doing it yourself, man. It's like a nigga in the world telling you, man, oh, don't smoke, bro. Don't smoke, bro. And then they still keep smoking. You know what I'm saying? That's being a hypocrite, man. Or it's like someone trying to tell you, what I'm saying, oh, you need to do this. It's like, oh, you're not supposed to lift or do push-ups this way. And then they got a fucking, gut, man. You know what I'm saying? So before you tell someone what to do, man, you have to ultimately, try to correct someone or stuff like that. You gotta make sure that you got something going on for yourself and that you're leading by example. You know what I'm saying? It's like me, I'm working out and then some fat dude is trying to tell me, give me advice and stuff. Like, you're not even taking care of your own body and you trying to tell me what to do. You got nothing to back up, you know what I'm saying, your thing, man. You know what I'm saying? You got no resume and you trying to tell me what to do. You know what I'm saying? Of course, I'm not saying, oh, that you can't, learn from these people. Yeah, once in a while, someone might, give you an absolute gem that, you wouldn't expect that coming from a person, that looks a certain way and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? But most of the time, people are going to try to give you advice and they're not following the advice themselves, man. You know what I'm saying? So you got to have that spirit of discernment, man. But, one of the main things, in accountability, man, is, ultimately, holding yourself accountable first, because, we're gonna, be held accountable before God. You know what I'm saying? So the Heavenly Father, you know what I'm saying, is gonna hold us accountable for everything that we did. You know what I'm saying? So, by holding ourselves accountable first and foremost, we have a higher chance at, really, making it and possibly, being saved, man. Because half of the world is not holding themselves accountable, man. The scriptures say, man, that there's gonna be gnashing of teeth, man. A lot of people, are not gonna take accountability when the Lord says no, in the times to come, man. You know what I'm saying? When the Lord says, no, you are not my son, man, or you are not my child, man. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people is going to be gnashing their teeth. And they're going to be like, what? You know what I'm saying? And the Lord's going to be like, nah, nigga, you wasn't doing what you was supposed to do. You know what I'm saying? But the men who's going to be chosen, the people who's going to be saved in the time, who's going to be preserved, are those who ultimately had themselves accountable, man. And of course, nobody was perfect in the walk, but the Lord ultimately sees, effort, man. That's the biggest thing, man. Because nobody's perfect, man. Even in a relationship, with somebody, or even friendship or whatever, man, or, you know, nothing's gonna be perfect, man. Of course, there's gonna be, you know what I'm saying, some disagreements. You might make a mistake or whatever. You might cross a boundary. But ultimately, learning from that mistake, you know what I'm saying, and taking accountability and admitting that you're wrong, you know, that shows effort, man. You know what I'm saying? In love, when you love something, man, you gonna show that effort, man. You're gonna admit when you're wrong. You're gonna change when there's needed. When change is needed, you're gonna change. You're gonna adapt, man. You know what I'm saying? And that's what effort is, man. You know what I'm saying? You still trying, man, you know, because nobody's perfect at the end of the day, man. You know? So always remember that the Lord is gonna ultimately hold everybody accountable, and those that, you know, held themselves accountable, you know what I'm saying, will be saved, man. You know, so with that, Lord, if I to give all praise and glory, how Bashim Shai, Bashim Kakadash, man. You know, keep taking accountability, man. You know, lead by example, and ultimately look yourself in the mirror, man, every day, man, and just humble yourself, man. You know, because at the end of the day, we nothing, man. You know what I'm saying? Even though we something, you know, we nothing right now, man. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, keep the faith, man. You know, nobody's perfect. You know, keep going. Learn from your mistakes. Lead by example. You know, Baba Ball, Death to America.